Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for braving the terrible weather out there. This morning, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Andrew Layman. He was born and raised here in Baltimore and went to the West Point, where he studied mathematics and operations research, and was shortly after commissioned in the Air Force. Spent some time abroad and also as a defense contractor in Saudi Arabia. He then comes here for medical school here at Johns Hopkins, where he developed a number of interests, but we're fortunate enough to have him here in pathology, where he's now an AP-only resident and has developed a love for forensics and cardiovascular pathology. Today he'll tell us about splenomegaly and PDS. So thank you, Andrew. Welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. As I can tell you kind of a little bit of the story, and I think it's pretty appropriate for what's going on today. As you know, is the switch to Epic Beaker. And this is kind of a story of my struggle with PDS and how I helped overcome it and was able to make some pretty interesting findings. So this is Splenomegaly, or how I learned to stop worrying and love PDS. So I'm just going to go over briefly kind of the case that introduced me to this problem, and then I really want to use this as a chance to highlight some of the resources that are available to residents and physicians as they can pursue some of their scholarly activities. So the case that started it all, we had a 74-year-old guy who came to our service. He came into the emergency room here. He had some left upper quadrant pain, and after an extensive workup, we showed to have what at the time was a non-specific B-cell lymphoproliferative disorder. He was started on chemotherapy while he was in the hospital, and unfortunately, while he was receiving his first dose of rituximab, he became non-responsive and died. At autopsy, we did find findings suggestive of mantle cell lymphoma, and some of his the lab work was suggestive of tumor lysis syndrome. So he was signed out as a probable tumor lysis syndrome due to mantle cell lymphoma. And here we have a picture of his momentum with diffuse nodularity that was appreciated throughout his entire body. But there was something about this that stuck with me after this case. This was a great learning case. I had a chance to work with hematopathology. I think Dr. Borowitz saw this one. Dr. Duffield helped me with it. But there was something about the spleen that stuck with me for a really long time. The spleen was huge, and now I was on my second tour of duty in the autopsy suite, and I thought it was for certain the largest spleen that I had ever seen. It weighed 1,650 grams. It was about the size of a 2-liter bottle of soda, when a normal spleen is about the size of a can of Coke or a cup of coffee or so. So it stuck with me, and actually to all my colleagues, I started bragging a little bit, telling everybody that I had, in fact, found the largest spleen ever grossed here at Johns Hopkins. And it's something I wore proudly over my weeks on the autopsy service. But it got me really questioning, is it really true? Is there a way to find out if this is the largest ever? And unfortunately for me, I found out that it wasn't. I dug deep into PDS, and on the little tiny red bar on the far right, a measly 1,650 grams compared to the largest ever, at least in PDS, of 4,800 grams. This is a search that I did based on the word splenomegaly, or enlarged spleen, and through a series of searches of pulling out various string texts, and at some point reading all of these. I spent more hours than I care to admit digging through these splenomegaly cases, but I found of those people that are diagnosed with either splenomegaly or enlarged spleen, the average size is about 539 grams of those. And a 4,800 gram spleen certainly is something that is a little anomalous. So you can't be satisfied with electronic media today, so I started to ask the question, is there photographic evidence? So I kind of had exhausted that first point. I exhausted PDS. That was one resource, and now I tapped into actually Fred. I called down the Pat photo, and I said, hey guys, there's got to be a picture of this spleen. I mean, this is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of spleen. And he said, sure enough, there's a photo down there. And he pulled it up, and it's not a spleen. It's a lung. So for whatever reason, this case, actually, Dr. Rubian, I believe this was, your name was on the photo, actually. Something that struck you about this case.
That we did.
So there was a picture of a lung, but there was no picture of a spleen. So I started to wonder, well, maybe this is a typo, 4,800 grams. It could be 480 and still be splenomegaly. So I tapped into the third resource here. I contacted the archives. And sure enough, they sent me a copy of the original report. This person had a spleen that extended 19 centimeters below their costal margin, was described as enormously large, and it sure enough was documented as weighing 4,800 grams. So I had a pretty compelling argument at this point, but I really wanted one more final verification. So I started looking at the chart, and sure enough, this is the guy I need to talk to, right? So I do a little Googling, and I find this gentleman, Dr. King. He's now the chair of pathology at Upper Chesapeake. He trained here in the 80s. Actually, he told me that Dr. Ruban, again, was the one who taught him how to do his first autopsy. And interesting, he called me back. I left a message with him, and he called me back in 10 minutes. 10 minutes! And this is that fourth, and I think probably the most impressive resource that we have to offer, which is the network of all our past graduates. And he calls me, and the first thing he says to me is, when the administrative assistant told me someone wanted to talk about an old autopsy of mine, I knew exactly the case they were talking about. And we had a wonderful conversation. We talked for about 10 or 15 minutes, and he recounted that, and I asked him specifically, why did you not take a picture of this spleen? And he authorized me to tell this story. But apparently he asked, the first question is, are the scales still at shoulder height? I go, yes, they are, in fact, at shoulder height. He said, well, when I was lifting this spleen up, it slipped out of my hands and splattered all over the room. And I paused for a second, and I said to him, so you're telling me it's an underestimate? So with that, this is, I think, a really great story of how just packing on all those things that Hopkins brings to the table really is something special that we have here, more so than maybe some other places in the world. So on that, I present to you the list of the largest PDS spleens, 1 through 15. I have to include 15 so I'm on it. But Dr. King takes the cake by far. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer, or if offline, I'd be happy to tell you how I went through PDS here. So, thank you.
Why did you start in 1984 and not 1884?
That would have required an extensive amount of reading. Unfortunately, the current search feature of PDS only allows us to go back to 1984. So that's the asterisk next to the title there. Great, thank you.